Jesus used food as a key part of his teachings and building relationships. And we're going to look at 3 instances today out of the many throughout his ministry where Jesus involved food with teaching and building relationships. All 3 instances have 4 things in common. The first instance we'll look at is well into his public ministry, about 2 years in. And Jesus had already healed many people. He'd already raised the widow's son and Jairus' daughter from death. So it's no surprise that when Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee, the news of his coming preceded him, and a crowd was gathering as he reached shore. And we pick up this story today in the 6th chapter of John, beginning with the 3rd verse. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "Well, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up, "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. The word of the Lord. So all 4 Gospels tell us that there were about 5,000 men there, besides the women and the children. So in total, many believe that there was 10 or 12,000 people there at least. Let's look at a few key connecting points in this story. First, food was not expected. The recipients had no reason to expect that food was going to be provided. And Jesus and his disciples had no obligation by social laws or customs to provide food. In fact, Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us about the disciples' suggestion on how to handle this. The disciples' suggestion was to send the crowd away to the villages and the countryside to find food. Yeah, just go out there into the countryside and maybe you'll find some food. That was their idea. The second key connecting point is about the food itself. It was simple. It was bread and fish. Simple. They were by the seashore there, and the boy had 2 fish. Simple. The third key connecting point is that there was teaching and relationship building. Jesus was teaching about the love of God and how he wants his children to treat others. The fourth key connecting point is that there was scarcity and Jesus provided abundance. Obviously, they were out there in the countryside, and a young boy offered 2 fish and 5 loaves. That was it. But Jesus multiplied it by thousands. The second instance that we'll look at today is we call the Last Supper. The first key connecting point is that it was not expected. Now, the Passover meal was expected and planned. The disciples had gone up to Jerusalem with Jesus for the Passover before, but not this way. This year was different. This year, Jesus kneels down and washes the disciples' feet. This year, he takes the bread, gives thanks, breaks it, and gives it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And let's remember that the English word used here in the translation doesn't fully bring across the original meaning. The original meaning meant mentally remembering, but also recalling in a way that's more like reliving the event with the people there. After supper, when the traditional cup of blessing is raised, this time Jesus takes the cup, gave thanks, and gave it, saying, "Drink from this, all of you," saying it was the blood of the new covenant poured out for forgiveness of sins. This was not expected by the disciples. The second key connecting point, bread. Although there were other parts of the Passover meal available there, it was just simple bread that was used for Holy Communion. The third key connecting point involves Jesus' teaching about what was about to happen in the next few hours. And he stressed the importance of strong relationships between the disciples. The third instance we'll look at occurs after Jesus' resurrection. Now, little detective work using the Gospels suggests that this event took place Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday following Jesus' resurrection. A few of the disciples had gone up to the Sea of Galilee and were fishing. And after fishing all night, they had caught nothing. Professional fishermen come up empty. The sun comes up and the disciples pull in their empty nets, and Jesus calls to them from the shore. And Jesus tells them to put their nets down on the starboard side of the boat. They don't think it's worth it. They're seasoned professional fishermen. But they do what Jesus asked anyway. And the result is a surprising catch, almost breaking the nets and capsizing the boat. And when they get to shore, Jesus is already cooking breakfast for them. So the first key connector here this was unexpected. The catching of the fish in such an odd way. Jesus cooking breakfast for them. Neither expected. Second, it was a simple breakfast. Bread and fish, the Gospels tell us. I wonder if that was intentional to remind the disciples of the time a couple of years before when they were food servers of bread and fish to thousands. Third, it was a vital time for teaching and relationship building and rebuilding. Peter had denied Jesus 3 times the night before the crucifixion. Undoubtedly, Peter had to think he was on the outs. The man who once declared Jesus to be the Son of God had denied him. And he must have felt that he was a castaway. But Jesus uses this time to reinstate Peter. This was an enormously important time for teaching and strengthening these relationships. And fourth, Jesus provided abundance out of scarcity, providing the enormous catch when there was no way that it would normally have happened. He was just continuing to show what he can do. Had the disciples relied on their own understanding, experienced professional fishermen, and discounting Jesus' instructions, they would have missed out. They would have missed out on a huge catch, an economic boost for professional fishermen. Maybe missed out on a special time for relationship with Jesus. Maybe missed out on the time Jesus reinstated Peter. And that reinstatement was vital. Vital part for Peter to then stand up and speak the day of Pentecost. So we have 3 instances with 4 common threads connecting each. But wait, Pastor, you might say, if you're keeping score, we missed the scarcity and abundance part of the Last Supper. We didn't miss it, we just saved it for last. Since Adam and Eve, we fall short of righteousness by sin. We cannot save ourselves. The scarcity is no righteousness on our own. But only through God's abundance in mercy and grace, through Jesus, can we have that relationship that God wants with us. He pours out His mercy and grace abundantly. On that Thursday night long ago, Jesus gave us the sacrament of Holy Communion, so that with the simple bread and the cup, we can connect with Him again and be reminded of His abundant mercy and grace. Let's pray. Loving Lord, thank you for all the mercy and grace you pour out on us. Thank you for all the blessings you have given us, including the ability to help those threatened by water and food insecurity around the world, including Mozambique, and right here in our mission field. And all the people said, Amen.